African leaders attending the 77th UN General Assembly have been vocal about conflict witnessed in the globe, both man-made and natural-made. Tonight we bring to you Central African President Faustin Archange Touadera, plus that of African Union President Macky Sall. Plus, today's September 21 has been celebrated the International Day of Peace under the theme End Racism, Build Peace. How can we build peace in our society in a very complicated situation that Africa and the world is plunged into? You shall find out in this edition of the news. Hello there and welcome to joining us on the 6 p.m. primetime newscast on For You Television. I am Tekewana at the anchor. We begin this day talking about the ongoing 77th UN General Assembly in New York, United States of America, beginning to talk about the outing of Macky Sall, who happens to be Senegalese president and doubles as the African Union president. Thus, of course, during his speech, he canvassed for support and said that it is time good enough for Africa to be given a seat in the G20. Let's get to listen from him, just what he highlighted during his speech to African leaders and the world.
Since our last session, the world has become more dangerous and more uncertain under the combined grip of global warming, security and health perils, and the war in Ukraine. The theme of this session reflects the urgent need to act together to ease tensions, to heal our planet, reduce persistent north-south inequalities, and reinstate the importance of multilateralism. The Security Council is called upon to address this first and foremost, to make sure that all threats to international peace and security, including in Africa, are handled in the same way. Terrorism, which is gaining ground on the continent, is not just an African matter. It is a global threat that falls under the primary responsibility of the Council, as it is the guarantor of the collective security mechanism under the charter of our organization. We therefore urge the Council to engage more with us in the fight against terrorism in Africa, and to do this with more appropriate mandates and more substantial resources. Furthermore, the African Union once again calls for the lifting of foreign sanctions against Zimbabwe. These harsh measures continue to fuel a sense of injustice against an entire people and to aggravate their suffering in these times of deep crisis. In the Middle East, we reiterate the right of the Palestinian people to a viable state, living side by side in peace with the State of Israel, each within secure and internationally recognized borders. We call for a de-escalation and a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, as well as for a negotiated solution to avoid the catastrophic risk of a potentially global conflict. The negotiations and discussions are the best tools we have to promote peace. I launch an appeal to put together a high-level mediation mission to which the African Union stands ready to contribute.
His Excellency Macky Sall, Senegalese president and African Union president, talking there. Now, we stay in New York this time around to get to join His Excellency Archange Touadera Faustin of the Central African Republic. He too was granted opportunity to deliver a speech during that deliberation of yesterday. Let's get to listen from him.
Mr. President, the 77th session of our Assembly convened around the theme "A Watershed Moment, Transformative Solutions to Interlocking Challenges," provides a solemn opportunity to consider the challenges that we share, which are serious causes of concern for the future of humanity. More than ever, the question of security, peace, the environment, and health are entering a phase which is critical. However, the warning signs are being ignored in favor of economic, geopolitical, and geostrategic interests. Mr. President, is not the role of the United Nations to transform the world, to make it more just and more secure, and to ensure the dignity of each and every one of us, regardless of the global context? Because, indeed, the many hotbeds of tension and crisis around the world tug on our collective conscience and also show us that our organization is the product of a bygone era. For that reason, the Central African Republic reiterates its support for the common position of the African Union, which calls for profound reform of the United Nations and the expansion of the seats of members of the Security Council to ensure the more just, more representative participation of all continents. Mr. President, the protection of the environment, that is to say, protecting the place where we live, is one of the interlocking challenges that we must absolutely overcome. It is time for the biggest polluters to honour their commitments, in particular the implementation of the Paris Agreement, as well as international solidarity for climate justice with respect to the most vulnerable populations.
His Excellency Archange Faustin Touadéra talking there, which of course his message had as focus climate justice, the paradigm shift in the health sector with regard to COVID-19 as well as insecurity in the globe. The world have today, September 21, celebrated the International Peace Day with the theme "End Racism, Build Peace." In our African context, nations have been urged to bury their differences and embrace peace as well as household. How can we build a peaceful society and community at a very complicated time that we are plunged into? Our reporter, Jixna Bissem, has the rest of that story for us.
As the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly convenes in New York, the International Day of Peace as declared by the United Nations is being commemorated. It recalls the noble words of 1945 Charter to save us from the scourge of war. Thus, the labors of generations of politicians, diplomats and security forces got framed by the dogma that war is always bad and peace is an unquestionable good that must prevail. War per se is not illegal. It is permitted in the United Nations Charter to counter crimes of aggression. The concept of a just war also exists under the international humanitarian law. War may also be necessary, indeed moral. Historically, genocides and crimes against humanity have ended through the use of force. At the same time, our peacemaking track record is unimpressive. Over the past half a century, it is hard to think of many armed conflicts that have truly and fully ceased, paving way for peace. Indeed, most grumble along, boiling up and simmering down periodically. Think of a historical conflict in Palestine or Kashmir, or the many struggles of Myanmar's periphery, or the insurgencies in Maghreb and in the Sahel region, not forgetting other African countries. According to reports, many national authorities are preoccupied with persistent internal divisions like South Sudan, which has seen ethnic violence. Internationally, the United Nations has spent billions of dollars and deployed tens of thousands of peacekeepers in scores of countries. Dozens of UN envoys along with those of regional bodies such as the European Union, the African Union, just to cite this few. Peace is provincial, and once a society has tested violence, it is perpetually prone to it, reason why endless armed conflicts have accumulated over the decades. Every conflict has a logic way that must be understood before countering it fairly and justly, so that the consequent peace is sustainable. Otherwise, to get peace, we may be obliged to first give conflict a chance.
We go over to Ivory Coast, where youngsters in Ivory Coast return to school this week with a sword of Damasos above their head. Those with average grade of less than 8.5 out of 10 will be excluded at the end of the academic year. It is the news which of course has been break by the presidential or the officials of education in Ivory Coast. Just how was the news received? Get the details in this report. There is no gainsaying that for several decades, the educational system in Africa has been greatly criticized. It is for this reason educational stakeholders in Ivory Coast, after mounting pressure on the government to beef up their school curriculum, the government finally succumbs to their pressure by reinstating an old measure with the hope of raising the general standard of education in the West African nation by prohibiting any people with an unacceptable grade from pursuing their studies. In a working class district like Adjamene, at the heart of the commercial capital Abidjan, the rule stirs comment at small stalls selling school supplies, where people also exchange second-hand textbooks.
In Côte d'Ivoire, education has taken a blow, a real blow. Our children are in high classes and don't have the level. They can't even write their names, write basic sentences. And that worries us. But I think this measure will make our children work.
But at the Pierre Amuji College in Adjamé, where the motto reads, "Who seeks perfection obtains excellence," is displayed in capital letters on the walls of the courtyard. The measure is generally well received among the students.
This measure is a good one. It will help the students and lead them to work harder, to redouble their efforts to get good grades.
However, we are told the measure has been existing since 1970 and the government is simply just restoring the policy to encourage students to work and fight for mediocrity.
To reassure parents, firstly, this is not a new measure. Students may be excluded from the school, but not from the school system. So there is no dropout, since we have bridges between the Ministry of National Education and Literacy and the Ministry of Technical Education and Vocational Training. The state of Côte d'Ivoire needs to think of these children who would not be able to continue on by inserting them into the social fabric by means of a technical education, for example, small trades, masons, blacksmiths, and so on. In any case, all the small trade that we know, they must be included. They must not be left behind, because all children, in my opinion, are useful for the development of the country.
In the past 2 years, the success rate for the baccalaureate has hovered around 30% compared with 45% in previous years. It is not uncommon in Ivory Coast to find classrooms with 60 or even 80 pupils, while a lack of teachers sometimes cuts short the school year by several weeks. Officially, Ivorian state schools are free, but the price of uniforms, style shells, and supplies can quickly put a strain on family budget, not to mention illegal registration fees sometimes requested by certain establishments. Last week, the government announced a free distribution of 6 million textbooks and 5.3 million kits of classroom supplies, as well as the provision of 167,000 tables. All effort gets towards beefing up education in Ivory Coast. And we now make a stop in Egypt, where Amnesty International on Wednesday accused the Egyptian authorities of continuing to stifle freedom 6 weeks before the opening of the UN World Climate Conference in Egypt. As you tell us, Ewan Epole.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in September 2021 launched a national strategy for human rights, insisting that education, health, and electricity are more necessary rights than the right to assemble, for example, which is almost forbidden in Egypt. Agnes Kalamar, Secretary General of London-based Amnesty International, accused the authorities of using this strategy to cover up their continuing human rights violation, thinking they can fool the world before the COP27. The human rights organization added that the international community must put pressure on Egyptian authorities to put an end to abuses and impunity, starting with the release of thousands of critics and opponents arbitrarily detained in Egyptian prisons. As a reminder, Mr. Abdel Sisi, since he came to power in 2013, is accused by these activists of having gradually prevented the population of expressing their opinions freely. Report from Amnesty says that Egypt has more than 60,000 prisoners of conscience, including peaceful activists, lawyers, academics, and journalists.
That report by Ewane Epole puts a wrap to today's 6 p.m. primetime newscast on For You Television. I want to thank you all immensely for your kind attention. I came in peace, and so shall I retire home in peace. Happy International Peace Day to every African. God bless Motherland Africa. Bye-bye.